So we continue our conversation about the depiction of the human figure, the human image in art, with a video lecture here of the human head and face. We will be working on a self-portrait by the, some studies this week and a long drawing by the end of next week. And most likely you will choose a self-portrait of a bust or the head and neck area. So we'll talk about the anatomy and how artists have depicted themselves and others in art. So here we see a very hyper-realistic drawing of a face, but overlaid with some real sort of naive and childlike line work throughout the rest of the paper. This is a digital drawing of a woman, also very realistic in the face and a little less so in the hair and the clothing. And this is Alice Neel. Alice Neel is a famous painter. I don't believe she's around anymore, but she would still be considered a contemporary figurative painter. And she's really one of the most well-regarded of the genre. Here is a pen and ink and charcoal, or she's calling it black crayon, on paper. And so you see that there's a high level of detail and a really sort of direct stare from the sitter. And then a little bit more generalized, a little bit more kind of looser line work in the hair and the clothing. But really distinct ways of handling the media depending on what she's trying to depict. So the clothing feels a certain way, the hair feels a certain other way, and the flesh itself feels another way. And then if you look at the hands and the legs, they really do depart from strict realism quite a bit. So speaking of line quality, this is Maggie Hambling's portrait of Henrietta Morges, charcoal on paper. Another contemporary drawing. So, but look at all of that wiggly line work. And it's really giving Henrietta this kind of wizened, sort of wrinkly look, which most likely the sitter did display. And then here we have colored gouache on paper. Gouache is like a watercolor, a little bit more opaque and a little bit more matte. It's often used as a drawing medium because it is very immediate. So it sort of blurs the line between drawing and painting. Drawing is usually considered to be dry medium and paint is usually considered to be wet, but we know with ink that that's not strictly true. Here is Romer Bearden's Obeah in a Trance. So this is a half figure, waist up kind of. And this is Bettina Steinke, Arturo Toscanini, and so Toscanini's a famous composer. And I think what's interesting here is that she really gave us the detail of the parts of the body that are relevant for this particular man, which is the face, the head, and the hands. And then, of course, the conducting baton. So he's a famous conductor. But look at the judicious and careful use of the white crayon, just on the tips of the finger, the top of the head, and a little bit on the collar of the shirt. It's very highly detailed in the places she chose to render, and then completely absent of drawing in the rest of the image. This is Al Hirschfeld's cartoon, I would say a caricature of Whoopi Goldberg from 1992. So this is another pen and ink, which is popular with illustrators and cartoonists. And then Matthias Grunwald, woman with an open robe. So Renaissance back again. Just really delicate line work, just very not a high level of contrast. So when we're depicting the human face and the human head, we do have to adhere to a rather strict proportional framework. And here's an example. This is, of course, is actor Brad Pitt, who's considered to be, sort of handsome in a traditional way. And here you can see it's overlaid. So those red lines, the top of the head is delineated by one red horizontal line, and then the eyes by the next one. In the same way, the bottom half of the face from the mid-eye to the bottom of the chin is exactly the same height as from the eye to the top of the head. So the eyes literally are halfway down the head when a person is looking straight on to you. The forehead and the top of the head are much larger than we generally remember them to be. So if you're just drawing from your imagination, chances are you're not going to place the facial features in the correct position. They really are, eyes are halfway down, eyebrows are a little bit above. Once you've divided the head in half at the eye level, then between the eye and the bottom of the chin, we divide that into thirds. The nose is at the bottom of the first third, the mouth is at the bottom of the second third, and then of course the chin is at the bottom of that. So it's very strict the way that we divide this space, and I expect that when we're drawing ourselves that we will adhere to this anatomy. There's another example. So this, of course, is a student, a woman, perhaps of a different ethnicity than Brad Pitt, yet you'll find the proportions of the face are exactly the same. Eyes halfway down, bottom of the face divided into thirds, nose, mouth, chin. Shazia Sikander, novice Thon, monks and novices. So Sikander drew a series of drawings of young monks, and this is one of them. So this is a really sort of delicate and beautiful rendering of this boy. Just the face, and if you overlay those red lines that we just saw in the previous two slides, you will find that that his anatomy does adhere to the sort of strict anatomical rules of half and then thirds. Here it is. So sometimes when we get with much younger people, children, the anatomy is a little bit different, especially with babies and toddlers. But this adolescent boy is old enough to exhibit this adult anatomy in the face, even though he may not have grown into all of his features just yet. So this is Adolphe Menzel's Studies of a Young Woman from 1870 to 1879. So these are studies, and oftentimes when we do studies, you will see that there'll be multiple drawings on the same page. This isn't a composition that's trying to tell us that these two women were back to back and there was a giant eyeball in the sky. This is just an artist thinking through form. And like sketchbook page kind of. So when I talk about studies, I want you to feel free to, use the paper to investigate a variety of different things. So it doesn't have to be one drawing centered. It could be multiple drawings on the same page. Once again, you will find that despite the difference in age and time and place, the facial anatomy remains the same. You do have to take into consideration when a head is bent or, looking up or looking down, although, logically the bone structure doesn't change. It's how we perceive it that will change, how we flatten it onto a two-dimensional surface. So just as in the full figure, when we're studying the facial anatomy, we do start with the skeleton, the structure of the skull, in other words. And then we overlay the muscle and flesh on top of that. We set eyes into the eye sockets, but you can see, I don't know if you can see the resemblance of this old man with the skeleton previous, despite all the flesh and saggy skin on top of the skeleton in this man's case. And look at how the artist rendered all of those sags and bulges and bags under his eyes and chin. It's just really beautiful. Drawing older people is often way more fun because there's just so much to work with. So when we do studies, sometimes we'll draw the same thing over and over in different positions to kind of get to know it, to figure it out. And so that's evidence of this happening here. Studies for eyes and etching from 1622. The same noses and mouths. In sculpture, we might do a little nose or a little mouth or a set of lips or eyes. Here we could draw them as well. And then, of course, ears. Ears are very strange. I don't know how how if frequently you actually look at an ear and consider the anatomy of the ear. When you look at someone, look closely at their ear or your own. Very weird. Jules de Brucker, self-portrait in front of St. Nicholas Church in Ghent. So I love how this is a finished drawing, right? But he's left parts of it completely unfinished and other parts of it in high detail. Like, this is a really great example of a self-portrait for me, where he's trying to tell us something, and you can see that in his eyes. And you see he's sitting in front of a mirror, and I don't know if his legs are cross-legged, but he's got his paper on his lap in front of him. So this is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to have our drawing board on our lap or on a chair in front of us, and sitting in front of a mirror and drawing, maybe not the full figure, but our seated selves. Self-portrait Gwen John from 1907 or 1909. Trani. So this is another portrait. I don't know if it's a self-portrait, but it is a portrait head, and you can kind of see at first it looks really abstract expressionistic. And then you see that underneath there is the structure of a head looking up and off to the upper, I guess, left in this case. Anne Gale, Self and Passage. So this is Anne Gale's self-portrait. Really interesting kind of grid-like structure that underlays the whole thing. Edgar Gerrans. So we're looking, we're standing with a man in his garage after he has killed a deer and is now starting to dress it. You see that it's fall or early winter in this location. Rhinebeck is either Germany or New York. My guess we're probably in New York. So this is an interesting drawing. This is Mark in front of a self-portrait. So Mark is an artist. He drew a self-portrait of himself, and this artist drew him in front of his self-portrait. So a portrait of a portrait. A portrait of a man and his portrait. So the last couple of slides are just describing how we would begin a drawing of a head, and we would start the same way we start all drawings, with just a light gesture, line drawing to establish composition in vine charcoal. So here's some vine charcoal, just very light sketchy lines, ones that are easily smudged away with an eraser or a rag or your hand, to reposition when you realize, you might have put one line in the wrong spot. So we start with this, we really fill the page, and then we diagram for anatomy. So we divide it in half there. There's the eye line, there's the bottom of the head in thirds. In this case, the face is looking up a little bit, so the forehead's receding away from us a little bit. So we're not getting it's pretty close to exactly halfway down there. We're seeing more of the neck and the bottom of the chin, perhaps. Then once we have diagrammed the anatomy, we can place those features along those lines and begin to erase some of those lines. And then, of course, we have the curvature of the face in the front as well to deal with. And then adding more detail, erasing some lighter areas, darkening the darker values. Measuring all the while to make sure, since the face is not looking directly at us, we're seeing a little less of one side of the face than the other. So we want to make sure we've accurately depicted that. And then finally, the fully rendered human head, the finished drawing, the final step, if you will. Okay, so we're going to set a mirror up in front of us, and we are going to draw ourselves much in this same fashion. Thank you.